we're ready to go, Chris. All right, Chris, thanks so much for the introduction. I think you pretty much did my entire presentation by the time you got through those couple sentences there. So thanks everybody for joining. First off, before I get started, I want to thank everybody at AI Makerspace. Chris and Greg and everybody else has put this together. The AI Engineering Bootcamp has been a wonderful experience. So learned a ton over these past 7 weeks. So thank you so much to the crew that put this together. So what we're going to talk about today, or the way that we're going to go about this, I'm going to walk through a handful of slides and kind of frame the issue that we're talking about here. And then from that, we'll go in and have an overview slide of the technology and how the code behind all this and how it all works. And then from there, we'll hop into, I'll just show a couple slides that kind of demo some of the agents and what some of the output is, and we'll go actually into a product demo, and then we'll wrap up with the next steps on how to build this out and enhance it even more. So with that, I will attempt to advance here. All right, there we go. So just sort of a summary or an overview of what we're talking about here. The challenge is in the biomedical space, primarily for the large pharmaceutical companies, clinical research organizations. As we all know, there's a ton of data out there. Now, the data challenge isn't unique to just the biomedical space, right? We're all dealing with the tsunami of data that's coming at us. But when we're doing biomedical research and drug discovery and development, the ability to sift through these very large data sets and then begin to make sense of them, like the biostatisticians do, is a huge challenge for the industry overall. And it's not just a challenge for the researchers, it's also a huge challenge for people that are patients as well. So a lot of times, if you're going to be involved in a clinical trial or something like that, there's a lot that you need to understand about how you're going to participate in the trial. Or if you're afflicted with some sort of disease, it'd be great to have a system that you could use that could help prep you before you go see your primary care physician, or even after you come away from your physician, taking some of that content and running it through a system like this that could help a non-scientist understand some of the scientific complexities associated with this. So that's sort of the challenge that we have here. And the solution, the way that we're going about this, look, we've all heard of, the power of the large language models. And I think a lot of us are very familiar with what we can do with retrieval-augmented generation. But what we're going to do with this one is we're going to take it a little bit step further, and we're going to bring agents into it. And agents give us an additional dimension that we can do with a traditional sort of LLM plus a RAG combination. And so the RAG combination works well. So if you're like a drug company, you've got all this data behind the four walls that have never been exposed to an LLM. You can take that data, you can throw it into a vector store and use RAG to query that data. What we can do with the agents is take that to the next level. So for example, when we go to query system, the machine can return a response, and we can use the reasoning capabilities of the machine to determine if the response is good enough. If it's not good enough, we can go back out and requery RAG and see if we can get a better answer. Or we can call a function with an agent, and an agent can go out and do a search across the internet and bring some additional information in. Or if we need to do some sort of sophisticated biostats, like if we're going to determine is there a significantly or a statistically significant difference between how this therapeutic asset works between men and women, we can call something like a Wolfram Alpha or a SAS to run across the data set and supplant the answer and make it better. Some of the key features, we'll talk about these here as we go through the sort of the technical overview, but you can see we're using the LangChain framework, and we could use a host of models here, whether it's OpenAI's model, Anthropic's model, Google's model. We're using the OpenAI GPT for this. And then we're going to talk about some of the specialized agent tools that we use as part of this. Impact and benefits we talked about when we got this kicked off. It can be an incredible tool for people that are doing research out there, just a huge tool. And also, equally, if not more important, we could use it for people that are patients as well. So patient support groups that are out there, so oncology, neurology, virology groups, they could train a model in that domain space and then open up to the people that are getting ready to go into a clinical trial. So as they go through the informed consent process, they could use something like this to help them better understand what they're getting ready to go into. All right. So we'll move on. And so this is something that's so Andre Karpathy last November, he had this video on YouTube, and it was about large language models, right? And intro to large language models. And as part of this, about halfway through, he introduced LLMs as thinking of LLMs from paradigm as a kernel of an operating system. And as Chris and Greg were going through the program and they were explaining agents to all of us, I started thinking that given Karpathy's sort of positioning as LLMs as like a kernel of an operating system, at least to kind of get my head wrapped around, I thought maybe I looked at agents as sort of like the middleware part that started kind of bringing these different pieces of the puzzle together. So as we begin to rely on the reasoning agents of the machine to do things, sort of like the agents were acting as like the middleware to start pulling these different pieces and parts together. So just sort of a technical overview of what we built here. I think I kind of mentioned earlier that we have a large language model out there, and we went ahead as part of this, and I grabbed a few documents, a handful of documents around the topic that we're going to show here is around CRISPR-Cas9, which is gene editing. So I grabbed some documents out there, and we could just pretend that the handful of documents that I grabbed out there are we put them in a vector story. This could be the data behind a company's firewalls, that they have their own scientific data. And then what we'll do here is then we'll leverage agents, and we'll start asking a couple questions, and we'll see that the machine is able to retrieve something out of the vector store and answer a question. We'll also see how it calls an agent to go out and answer some other stuff. But we're going to skip these first 3 steps here. I think these are all fairly basic setup things here, the environment setup, tool integration. The agent state and workflow. The 3rd bullet point in particular is what I want to focus on a little bit here. We're using a module called LangGraph. And what LangGraph does, it's usually creates cyclical graphs. And cyclical graphs are what we can leverage the reasoning capabilities of the LLM. And then within LangGraph, we have state graph. And state graph helps us manage the flow of the conversation or tasks by keeping track of the current state and determining what to do based on that current state. And then we're going to talk a little bit here about the very bottom bullet point there, conditional edges. And conditional edges are also part of the state graphs that kind of goes to the next level and allows us to do a bit more sophisticated stuff. They're used within state graphs to determine the next state based on certain conditions or the result of a prior action. So we could have a chatbot that could be a series of states, and the state graph is sort of like the map. And then within that, we can call conditional edges to do additional functions. So if a chatbot's engaging with a person and it begins to learn about what that person wants, the conditional edge could be, oh, this is a question around a billing question or a technical question, or I don't know. So it knows how to route the question or where to go for the next steps. So the RAG integration part. So we're just creating the vector store. And you'll see here the very first thing that we do is we ask the question to the LLM. It goes out to the RAG model, sees if it can retrieve it. If not, calls additional function and can do a search in the internet for us. And here we're talking once again about the conditional edges and the control flow. Important point here, 2nd bullet point, we're using Pydantic and GPT-4 to assess if the RAG's response is correct. So we'll see the machine ability to come through. And what it'll do is more or less, did I get a good answer? No. If yes, then I can pass the answer back, and here's our output. And if it's no, then I need to call an agent or go back in and properly answer the question. All right. So we'll show just a couple of screenshots, and we'll hop into the application. And I've got a handful of questions around gene editing that we can ask the machine. So the first question we ask is, what's the functional mechanism behind the CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing, and how does it differ from other gene editing techniques? And so based on the content that we'd pulled into our vector store, the machine was able to answer this question without going out and doing any sort of additional search here. So you can see in sort of light green, I've got the questions highlighted. And then in the light yellow, that's the machine generated response. So it actually came back with some pretty good responses. And I haven't done, so one of my next steps will be to do RAGIS. So we'll see when we get the next steps, start tuning some of this up. So now we ask a different question. So who won the Nobel Prize for their work with CRISPR, and what university did they attend? And you can see here in the response from the machine, it came back and said, I don't know. So that was a trigger out there for it to go out. And we just had to do just a DuckDuckGo search, a good Google Scholar search, or a handful of other searches. But for this model here, we're using DuckDuckGo. So I went on and did a DuckDuckGo search, and it came back and it found the Nobel Prize winner for their work with CRISPR. It's Jennifer Dewatna, and she attended UC at Berkeley. So I did a pretty good job of returning that question. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to jump over here.
In 1 minute.
We've got about 1 more minute here. Pull this up. Can everybody see the screen here? All right. So right now I have a question in here, like, what's the state of capital of Illinois? And it came back that Springfield, Illinois. I'm just going to go ahead and grab one of these questions here. Our researchers and biotech companies. So we'll just drop it in here real quick. I think we're a little pressed on time. Oop.
I think you need to put the code.
Yeah, there we go. All right. There we go. So it came back and we saw that it didn't know, so it had to go out and had to do a search on DuckDuckGo to bring back the answer. So what I want to do here real quick, I want to jump back over. And then just for next steps, what we have here is we're going to want to expand the our tool belt with additional data sources and APIs. So we'd want to reach out to things like clinical registries and drug information sources, like IQVIA, Syneos, which are some private data companies. Definitely need to enhance our RAG capabilities. So we're going to want to explore bringing in domain-specific LLMs or fine-tuning a smaller open source model to the specific domain, whether that be oncology, virology, neurology. Obviously, we need to get the RAG assessment, the RAGis assessment framework out there to start as we start making these changes, but want the baseline to see if the changes are improving our retrieval capabilities. And we also want to start integrating some of the advanced analytical tools like Wolfram Alpha and SAS to help us with some of the capabilities. Explore potential partnerships and collaborations that we have out there with some industry partners and research institutions. And obviously, we need to improve the user interface and user experience.
Thank you so much, Robert. Yes, okay.